Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Our kids can be dismissed. There's great things down the hall for them. To the rest of you, thank you so much for being here at the 11:15 service at Community Christian Church. I'm going to give you just the sentence for the sermon just right up front today. Here it is. There is courage to take in a God who controls the coincidences. There is courage to take in a God who controls the coincidences. Way back in what seems like another lifetime now, I used to help run chains for the high school and the college football teams here in town. And when you're propping up the first down marker on the sideline of an opposing team, let's just say that you are in the earshot of some pretty low-level linguistics, okay? I wanted to give the opposing teams a thesaurus, like sometimes. Like, I get you're upset about a call, okay? But let's find a new word to communicate our distaste for the referee. Like, the word they all liked has been used since 1862, and I think it's time for a new one. Yes? Do you agree? There is such an affluence of pristine, unused descriptors that could be utilized when flags fly against us. Yeah? Aw shucks is one of them, right? I don't think that one's ever been uttered on a sideline in the history of man. But one of the complaints... Thank you for being tickled for me. I appreciate that. One of the complaints that kept popping up over and over again was that teams, when I was on the sideline there, they were just convinced, right? Absolutely certain and fixed in their belief that the zebra who had just thrown the flag against them was not only a fan of the home team, but that he lived in the row of houses right behind them, right? That he had just walked 10 yards to get to the field that day. And without fail, coaches and players and cheerleaders, even the team doctor, right? They knew that all of the officials had this permanent housing arrangement with the city of Fort Scott and the Tigers and the Greyhounds. And that common sideline experience that I had every game was really quite something. Well, it turns out that there are some people who did some studies about this sort of thing, and referees, we all think, are unbiased, right? They can never be influenced, is the way we would put it. Well, researchers at the College of New York led a study, and they found the opposite, turns out. Whatever team is closer to a play, this is what they found. If it happens on their sidelines, referees are much more likely to make calls in favor of that team. They analyzed 5 years of NFL games, including 1,400 penalty calls. Specifically, they looked at late hits. So like you can tackle somebody inbounds, but if you're out of bounds, then you can't tackle them. And so a lot of times those kind of plays happen so quickly that it's kind of a judgment call. And so was it a late hit or not? And what they found was that more times than not, the call complied with what the team nearest to the play was demanding. Like not always, but enough of the time to raise some eyebrows. Now here's what I take from all of that. That intimidation works. It does, right? You yell at the refs, you get in their face, thesaurus or not, it doesn't matter. The odds are those refs eventually cave to your pressure. And so let's just do an exercise today. Let's say that you're the referee on the field today. And social pressure is a powerful force. And it takes either a special kind of person or a special kind of power to stand up to that kind of social pressure. And so how are you going to do that? Where's your courage going to come from? Last week we jumped back into the book of Acts, and we just have a few chapters left. I want to give another commercial for a resource that we have outside. It's just the book of Acts in print, and on each page is a page of notes. If you're following along with us in this book, we're about page 130 today, and we'll follow after that. But we're in chapter 22, and Paul is in the temple, and he's being falsely accused of defiling the temple by bringing a Gentile inside of it. And so there's this riot that ensues. There's this angry mob that beats Paul, and they surely would have killed him, but the Roman authorities intervene, and Paul asks for an opportunity to speak to the crowd that has just beat him up. And it is granted to him. And what Paul does is he does not justify himself, but he gives the story about how the resurrected Jesus cleansed him from all of his sin. And that's where we kind of left off last week. And he tells the people about Ananias coming to baptize him and that he returns to Jerusalem. And then he tells them that he gets his life mission from God, that he was to go and tell the story of Jesus to the Gentiles. And I want you to, if you mark in your Bible, circle that word Gentiles, because that's the 4-letter word that changes everything. Luke writes that the angry mob had been listening to Paul right up until that word, Gentiles. And when they hear that word, the crowd loses their minds. They wanted to throw Paul off the planet. They scream at him. They yell at him. They throw dust in the air. They probably throw dust at Paul. They probably threw dust because there weren't rocks, okay? The Roman chief commander in charge could tell that nothing was good was about to happen. And so he grabbed Paul, he takes him away out of the crowd. And all of this time, we need to understand that Paul has been speaking and giving his story in Aramaic. And that's important because it's likely the Roman commander, his name was Claudius, did not understand Aramaic. And so he's still wondering what in the world is happening and why everybody is so upset at Paul, and he has no answers. And so once back in the safety of the Roman barracks, Claudius orders Paul to be flogged. Paul was no stranger to beatings. He had had plenty of those before, but flogging was different. It was worse. Attached to a short wooden handle were a lot of leather strips, and inside those leather strips was sharp pieces of bone, wood, maybe even metal, and each blow of this thing would rip and tear the skin and open up the flesh, and flogging was usually done by 2 soldiers, one on each side, and often death was the result of being flogged. This was what Jesus endured before the cross. And in Paul's case, flogging was a fact-finding mission. This was torture for truth. That's what's happening. Claudius hadn't gotten any coherent answers from the mob, and so he thinks, I will beat it out of Paul, and I'll find out what's going on. Luke writes that even as they have Paul stretched out to begin to receive blows, that Paul speaks to the centurion closest to him and says, hey, by the way, is this lawful what you're doing to flog a Roman citizen? And those were the magic words. Because it was, in fact, illegal to flog a Roman citizen, especially without any kind of due process. And so Claudius knows that if word gets back to Rome that he has done this, and it's happened under his watch, he would be in considerable trouble. And so the demeanor towards Paul changed on a dime. Like almost completely, it went from torturing Paul to now protecting Paul. All because of the coincidence that he happened to be a Roman citizen. We're not sure how Paul gained Roman citizenship. Maybe his father, his grandfather gained their citizenship through some service to Rome or something like that. We just know that Paul was a Roman citizen by birth, and so they passed it on to him. And because of that, his chains, in this instance, are taken off, and he is ushered back to the barracks. He spends the night under protective custody. The next day, Claudius gets up, and he has a problem because he needs to hold on to Paul. If he doesn't, there will be a riot in Jerusalem, and he can't have a riot on his watch. And so, on the other hand, he has no formal charges against Paul that justify keeping him in custody. And so he's kind of stuck. Like, what do I do now? And so he decides to convene the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is the supreme judicial and religious body of all the Jewish people. And so he sets Paul in front of them, and he just stands back and watches what happens. It's a very hastily called meeting. And as Paul is before this body of men, he sees this as yet another opportunity to tell his Jewish brothers about Jesus. And this time he has a shot at all of the highest religious figures in the land. He begins this way. He takes a good long look at the group in front of him. He probably knew some of them personally. It's possible that he had once been a part of this group. It had been 25 years now since the Sanhedrin was gathered together to listen to a man named Stephen. That's Acts chapter 7. And Paul was there that day. And they listened to him testify about Jesus, this guy named Stephen. And so he knows some people in the crowd, probably. And he addresses them informally. He says, my brothers, he says, I have lived up my life before God in all good conscience up to this day. And he had. Even when Paul was doing what would turn out to be the wrong thing, like murdering Christians, right? He thought he was doing the right thing for God. And so the road to Damascus changes his life completely. That was our sermon last week. He doesn't say he's perfect here or that he's never sinned, just that he's always done what he thought God wanted him to do. He's always lived up to the light that he had, and in fact, that is what he is doing even now. It wasn't a real disrespectful way to start, but nevertheless, there was some great offense taken in the room. Ananias the high priest, this is a different Ananias, by the way, than the one that baptized Paul last week. Ananias the high priest orders Paul to be smacked in the mouth. And someone close to Paul, I'm sure, obliged. And the order itself was illegal. The Jewish law said this: he who strikes the cheek of one Israelite strikes as it were the glory of God. It was also said, he that strikes a man strikes the Holy One. I wonder how much people would punch other people in the face if we all understood that when we did, we were really punching God himself. That's not a bad guardrail there. And so Paul knows all this law, and he knows that smacking him in the face was the wrong thing to do, and his cheeks are still stinging, and he lashes back. He says, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. There's a parable in the Old Testament in Ezekiel where a dilapidated wall is given a coat of white paint so that it glows and it shines, and after the paint dries, the wall is declared stable and fixed because of the fresh way that it now looked. And of course, the first rain or storm is going to wash all that away, right? Like paint doesn't change the truth. It's still just an old, broken down wall. And Paul is using that parable in Ezekiel, and he's pointing to the high priest. He's pointing out hypocrisy. He says, you might look okay on the outside, but we can see that on the inside you're really full of decay and filth and rot. And it was kind of an impulsive retaliation. The ones standing around Paul say, would you revile God's high priest? And Paul kind of recoils and recants and says, I didn't know it was the high priest. And the idea I grab onto there is that Paul is speaking sarcastically. I mean, read that line with sarcasm. I didn't know he was the high priest. Like, this guy's behavior is so unlike high priestly behavior that he can't possibly be the high priest of God. Verse 6 tells us that it's at this point in the meeting that Paul knew that he would never get a fair hearing. And so he does something very strategic. He pulls the pin on a theological grenade and he lobs it into the room, and he says this: I am a Pharisee, and the whole reason I'm on trial today is because I believe in the resurrection. Now that was a divisive statement. The Pharisees in the room believed there would be a resurrection. That was half of the room. The Sadducees in the room did not believe there would be a resurrection. That's why they were sad, you see. Heard that? Yes. And instantly there is chaos in the room. There's chaos as members of the Sanhedrin rush to their tried and true arguments for or against the resurrection, and they turn their anger toward each other and, more importantly, away from Paul. And so Paul's grenade has now worked. But it's not just a tactic, it's the truth. Paul really is on trial for his belief in the resurrection, just not his own, the resurrection of Jesus. Interestingly, when we get to chapter 26, Paul is in another court on another day, and he looks back at this day and this little theological bomb that he throws into the room, and that's the only thing that he points to and regrets. Maybe it's because of all the anger and heat that it causes in the room. Theologians love to argue, right? And men here get so infuriated that the Roman guy in charge, Claudius, has to step in and he has to end the meeting, and he takes Paul out of danger and back to the barracks. The difficulty at in the end of the book of Acts is that there are so many moving parts to the narrative. Like, we've just spent a lot of time walking through what has happened with Paul. But I want you to think about Paul's last 2 days. If we could sum it up, it goes this way. He's been misunderstood. He's been falsely accused. He's been beaten. He's been arrested. He's been chained. He's been misidentified. He's been shouted down. He's been threatened with flogging. He's been dragged into court. He's been punched in the mouth. He's in the center of such a clamor that Roman soldiers have to take him out of the meeting of the Sanhedrin by force, and then he's taken back into custody and held by Romans. That's 2 days of his life. Like, how do you go on after that? Like, if that's Monday and Tuesday, then I don't want to look forward to Wednesday, right? It's not difficult to imagine that Paul felt dejected. He felt discouraged. And now he's back in his cell. He's humiliated. He's a little defeated. His friends cannot help him. And the church, oh, this is an amazing thought. If you think back to when Peter was in prison in much this similar kind of case, Luke writes that the church in Jerusalem spent all night praying for Peter, and Peter was miraculously released from prison. Well, here's Paul in the same predicament. Where's the church? We're not told. We don't know. Maybe they were praying, maybe not. We don't know. And so Paul is as alone as he could be. But Jesus knows. Verse 11, this is the one we read. This is the one I want you to take with you today. The following night, the Lord stood by him and said, "Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome." Jesus knew exactly where Paul was. And he came to Paul, and he stood by Paul. In Corinth, in chapter 18, Jesus came to Paul in a vision. And that's the word that Luke uses, vision. In chapter 22, Paul talks about being in the temple and being in a trance, and Jesus speaks to him, and that's the word he uses, trance. Here, neither of those words. This is not a trance. This is not a vision here. It says Jesus stood by him. Jesus came to Paul and stood by him, like physically stood by him. And we have no reason from the text to assume anything different. This was the very presence of the physically resurrected Jesus standing by Paul in the time that he needed courage the most. When all the choices and all the voices go against you in this world, you need this verse. There are 3 things here that I think will help, and if all Jesus had done was come and stand next to Paul that night in his cell, I think that would have been enough. But there's more here. There's more for Paul here. There's more for you and for me. I want you to look at what he says. He says, take courage. Say that with me. Take courage. Tharseo is the word. Just one word in Greek. And the crazy thing about this word that I didn't know until just this last week is that the only person to ever speak this word in the New Testament is Jesus. He speaks it 5 times. Tharseo. Some people bring some bedridden, a paralyzed friend to Jesus in Matthew chapter 9, and Jesus says to them, take courage, Tharseo, son. Your sins are forgiven. Later in that same chapter, a woman who has bled for 12 years is in a packed crowd of people. They're all around Jesus. She weaves her way through close enough to Jesus to touch him, and Jesus turns around and says to her, take courage, daughter, Tharseo. Your faith has healed you. The disciples are in a boat. They're out on the Sea of Galilee at night. Jesus comes walking across the water to them. They're scared out of their minds. They think that he's a ghost, and he says, take courage, Tharseo. It is I. It really means I am. Don't be afraid. In the upper room at the Last Supper on the night that they will all betray him, Jesus says to his closest friends, Tharseo, take courage, for I have overcome the world. And the 5th and the last time that he says this word is right here in Paul's cell as he's standing over Paul. Take courage. When all the choices and the voices of the world are against you, take courage. He is right there by your side. With Ben Johns on my side on the pickleball court, I'm going to win some games, okay? With Michael Phelps on my relay team in the pool, I'm going to win some medals. I'm not going to be the reason for the medals, but I'm going to win some. With Mahomes throwing me passes, he's at least going to hit me in the hands. okay? So that I can catch some touchdowns. And with Jesus standing by my side, just like he was there with Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego in the furnace, Nebuchadnezzar looks into the fiery furnace and saw not 3 men, he saw 4. And the fourth, he said, looked like a son of the gods. It was Jesus. And with Jesus standing with me, no matter what this world throws at me, it can never really harm me. Ancient historians record that horse traders one day brought a beautiful black horse to the court of King Philip. King Philip was Alexander the Great's father. And the horse was amazing, but it was vicious. It was stomping and it was kicking everyone who came near it, and the king's horseman was about to reject the horse. And then Alexander came forward, and he was greatly taken with this animal, and he asked permission to ride the horse. He saw the problem was that the horse was frightened by his own shadow, and so what Alexander did was he turned the horse's head into the sun. And by doing that, he was able to leap on the back of the horse and ride the horse in front of the king. And that's the advice for us here. Turn into the sun. Look into the sun of righteousness, and when you do, shadows will disappear and courage will come. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. Take courage. And then Jesus will say to Paul this: you have a purpose. If there's one thing that probably crossed Paul's mind as he sore in his cell there that night, it might have been along these lines: oh, this is it. This is the end. That was my chance. There's nothing left for me now after this. And Jesus comes in, and he gives Paul this very straightforward promise. He says, no, this is not the end. I have more for you to do. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, you're also going to do the same thing in Rome. It's going to happen. Your ministry is not over, Paul. God is working out his promises. Not in the way that Paul would have thought or expected or wanted, but in such a way that nothing could derail them. It was late June 1926. There was a young missionary in his mid-20s. His name was Raymond, and he fell ill from typhus fever, and he was in a mountain village, a remote village in the mountains of Ecuador. And his illness was so dire that they put him on a train. They moved him to the port city of Ecuador, and his wife followed him. And when she arrived at the hospital, the doctor told her that her husband's feet were already cold, and it was just a matter of hours that he would die. A fellow missionary ordered a black cloth-covered coffin for the missionary's burial. She didn't have a black dress, but she did have the wedding dress that she had just worn, and so she dyed it black. They even set a time and a date for the funeral, July 4th at 3 p.m. Fast forward 41 years later. It's 1967, and Dr. V. Raymond Edmond is the 4th president of Wheaton College, and he is addressing the student body when he suddenly collapses after a slow half-turn, and then moments later, he passed into the presence of the King of Kings. And Dr. Edmond had known 41 years of faithful service since they had scheduled his funeral. One guy wrote this about that God's servants are immortal until their work is done. And by servants, I don't mean presidents of Bible colleges. I mean you, me. No servant of God dies a premature death. Just like Paul, you have a job to do for God. You have a purpose, and nothing will stand in the way of it. Finally, Jesus says this to Paul: I have a plan. I have a plan. Jesus says, Paul, just like you testified in Jerusalem, you will get to Rome and share my story there because I have a plan. And if you read just the next few verses, you can see the plan already beginning to take shape. Chapter 23, verses 12 to 15, tell about a conspiracy. There are 40 radical zealots who vow not to eat or drink a thing until they have killed Paul. They're either going to kill themselves or they're going to kill Paul. One of the two is going to happen. And so they try to set up another meeting with the Sanhedrin so that Paul will have to show up, and maybe on the way they can kill him before he gets there. But here's the coincidence. The son of Paul's sister hears of their plans, otherwise known as Paul's nephew. And that verse gives us lots more questions to ask. Like, Paul has a sister? Huh? Paul has a nephew? Like, this is the only record in Scripture of their existence, and we don't get much other than they expose this conspiracy against Paul's life. And God takes an unidentified nephew of Paul and puts him in the right place where he can hear the right words, and it saves Paul's life. The nephew goes and tells the Romans about the plot. They snap into action. They move Paul to another jurisdiction. They send him with a letter to the authorities in that other town explaining the whole thing, and they make sure that no radical terrorists will ever get to Paul. Paul leaves Jerusalem actually on horseback. Remember, he's a prisoner. And he's on horseback now, surrounded by 470 Roman soldiers. Like, he left Jerusalem more of a king than a criminal. And meanwhile, his vowed enemies are left behind, apparently starving to death. Paul, I am with you. You have a purpose. I have a plan. Take courage. There was a famous pianist, Paderewski. He was scheduled to perform in a great concert hall, and this was one of those evenings to remember. It was black tux, like long evening dress, high society extravaganza kind of night. And in the audience that night, there was a mother. She had brought her 6-year-old fidgety son. And he was bored even before the concert began. Like, he was squirming in his seat. And his mother had taken him there in hopes that he would want to practice the piano more after hearing the immortal Paderewski. And so it was quite against his wishes that he was there. His mother turned to talk with some friends, and he couldn't stay in his seat for another second. And he slipped out of his seat, and he slipped out into the aisle. And once he was in the aisle, he was strangely drawn to the ebony concert Grand Steinway with its leather-tufted stool on the huge stage flooded with all of these lights. And so he went down, he climbed up the steps. The sophisticated audience was unaware, and the boy sat down at the stool. And he placed his small fingers in the right location, and he began to play chopsticks. Dun, 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 right? The crowd got silent, and when they realized what was happening, hundreds of now frowning faces are turned towards the stage. Some of them begin to yell at the kid that is playing chopsticks. And backstage, Paderewski overhears all of this. He grabs his coat. He rushes to the stage. He comes up behind the boy, and the 2 hands on the piano become 4 hands, and he begins to play around the boy this amazing melody while the boy plays chopsticks. And as they both play together, he says in the boy's ear, "Keep going. Don't quit. Keep playing. Don't stop." And from childish chopsticks came a concert. Sometimes it seems that the best we can do in this life is to produce the equivalent of chopsticks. And the choices and the voices of the world are against us, and we find them even yelling us off the stage. And how are we going to go on? Here's how. Because Christ stands over us. Christ plays around us, and he plays a melody, and he says, "Take courage, I have more work for you. Keep playing, keep going, don't stop, don't quit." And the music is more beautiful than we can ever imagine. God, there are challenges in this life that threaten to turn us back. There are dangers in the world, our own desires, our own choices, the negative voices of others, all kinds of things. May we find our courage in you today, Lord. Remind us of your presence with us, that you promised us, "I am with you always, even to the end of the age." And may that presence give us power to live your plans. And it's in the name of the God who orchestrates even nephews for our good. It's in the name of Jesus that we pray, and all the people said.